The topic of discussion today will include fluid and electrolyte balance, energy metabolism in a neonate, carbohydrate, which includes carbohydrate, fat, and protein metabolism, thermoregulation, and metabolic response to stress. We start with the fluid and electrolyte balance. Perinatal changes occurs in the body in a neonate in early fetal life. Total body water, the majority of it is constituted by extracellular fat, which is about 65%. Whereas in the first trimester, this total body water is about 90% of the total body mass. In a preterm infant, it comes down to about 80%, and in a term infant, 75%. So there is a gradual extracellular fluid loss till birth. The total body water is constituted of intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid, which is constituted of the interstitial fluid, plasma volume, and a very small quantity of transcellular fluid, which includes the CSF, pleural fluid, peritoneal fluid, etc. So the trend in the neonate is that there is a gradual ECF loss, and postnatally there is a dramatic loss, which is physiological, which we'll discuss later. With easy ECF loss and a larger body surface area in the child with respect to body mass compared to an adult, there is high risk of dehydration in neonates. So the events during birth, before labor, there is decrease in pulmonary fluid secretion, resorption of existing fluid in the lung occurs, an increase in effluent through trachea occurs, and all these processes dry out the lung, and they are accelerated during labor. And also during labor, vascular fluid shifts occur as the arterial pressure increases. There's a rise in hematocrit, and sometimes when there is delayed placental umbilical cord clamping and depending on position of the child, there may be increased placental transfusion, which leads to 50% rise in RBCs and blood volume, and there'll be a risk of polycythemia in such cases. And the first few days of life, day 1 and day 2, there are dramatic fluid shifts occurring from intracellular fluid compartment to the extracellular compartment. This contributes to the weight loss that we know as physiological weight loss, which is about 5 to 10% in term and about 10 to 20% in a preterm child. So this occurs by diuresis and natriuresis. And the reason is that there is a postnatal surge in atrial natriuretic peptide. In these children, there is also limited responsiveness to antidiuretic hormone and decreased renal sodium absorption due to immaturity of the kidneys. So total body water balance in a neonate, depending on the renal parameters, there is a newborn is oliguric. This is because it has small immature glomeruli and the GFR is about 30 in a newborn. There is a gradual rise in this GFR, which is due to increase in systolic PP, increased renal blood flow, and increased glomerular permeability with age. So as you can see here, the GFR from in a premature infant may be about 10 to 15, and it gradually increases in the first 2 weeks of life. With this, the daily excretion of urine output also increases from 15 ml per kg per hour in a premature to about 25 to 125 in a 2 weeks age child. Also, the newborn produces dilute urine because there is a less effective countercurrent mechanism in a neonate. So the maximum osmolality concentrating capacity of a premature child may be as low as 400, while in a term child it goes up to 800. In extremely low birth weight and premature children, it can be as low as 70 to 80. And in adults, it is about 1200 osmoles. So a preterm kidney has relatively low interstitial urea concentration, a shorter loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct are less responsive to ADH hormone. So it produces more dilute urine. The other important contribution to total body water balance is insensible water loss. This occurs via skin and mucous membrane, that is 2/3. This is the major component, and via respiratory tract in 1/3. So maturity of skin is the most important variable which determines insensible water loss. In a preterm infant, the skin is immature and it is keratinization is not complete. Keratinization is complete usually by is well mature by 34 weeks of gestation of the stratum corneum. Also, the child, as discussed earlier, children have larger body surface area to weight ratio and increased skin vascularity. In an NICU environment, there are many factors that affect the insensible water loss. And this table shows the same. Body weight, which is inversely proportional to the maturity. Radiant Vama used during procedures. Phototherapy. Phototherapy is not much contributory now with newer phototherapy devices which use LED, as they don't produce that much heat. Ambient humidity and temperature in double walled humidified incubators. A high ambient humidity is known to conserve total body water. High body temperature, pyrexia is known to cause increase in sensible water loss. Tachypnea also, skin breakdown, which we see most often in peristomal skin excoriation or after removal of adhesives which denude the skin. Congenital absence of normal skin covering in such as large omphalocele, neural tube defects, or skin losses in epidermolysis bullosa. There is also a neuroendocrine response when it comes to total body water balance. As the child has osmoreceptors, carotid receptors, baroreceptors, which are sensitive to osmolality in the intravascular compartment and also hypovolemia. So when there is osmolality more than 285 and hypovolemia, ADH secretion, free water retention occurs, which causes free water retention with by reabsorption from distal renal tubules and collecting ducts. The other potent stimulations of ADH in newborns include hypoxia and acidemia and hypercarbia. There's a condition of SAIDH which is known to occur in neonates, that is syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. This occurs following insults like intracranial hemorrhage, sepsis, or hypotension in the absence of hyperosmolality or volume depletion. And this may manifest as hyponatremia, hyperosmolar serum, and low blood urea nitrogen. Hydration status evaluation in a newborn. It is mainly by physical examination. We observe the skin for edema or loss of skin turgor, mucous membrane, whether it is moist or dry, periorbital tissues, whether sunken or puffy, anterior fontanelle, whether full or sunken. And this gives us an indication to what's the fluid status of the child. Vital signs, blood pressure is a late sign. Drop in blood pressure is a late sign. However, decrease in pulse volume and tachycardia may be considered an early sign. Tachypnea may be there due to metabolic acidosis with hypovolemia. And CRT more than 3 seconds is a reliable indicator of hypovolemia. Urine output of 1 to 3 ml per kg per hour by day 3 of life. It is only post day 3 to day 5 where urine output can be used as reliable indicator of the hydration status of a child. Blood investigations, elevated ESR may be seen. Urine specific gravity is whether it is in the normal range, and serum electrolytes and acid base status is important during hydration status evaluation. Fluid administration in a neonate is different from adults. In adults, we have formula-based calculation for requirement of fluids. In newborn, there is a wide range of maintenance requirements. It depends on clinical conditions, insensible water loss, based on ambient temperature, phototherapy, pyrexia, as discussed earlier, whether the child has PDA or chronic lung disease. So, fluid administration has to allow for adequate physiological weight loss in the first 7 to 10 days. Target urine output is usually more than equal to 1 ml per kg per hour. The total blood volume estimate in a preterm is about 106 ml per kg. In a term neonate, it is about 90. Infants, it is about 80, while in adults, it is about 65 ml per kg.
I just want to make one point before I forget.
Yes,
Is
sir.
it okay? Is it okay? I just interrupt you for a second.
Sure, sir.
Please go ahead, sir. Otherwise, we'll lose the track. Please.
That's why. That's why. See, normally, lot of premature deliveries are happening in the general obstetric population. So most of these deliveries are being done by obstetricians who are aware of the problems of premature babies, and almost all of them will receive 1 or 2, mostly 2 doses of antenatal corticosteroid. Okay, are you aware of that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Correct, no? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, the advantage of giving corticosteroid is touted largely as improvement of maturation of lung. So, lung maturity, it is given for lung maturity. The other side advantage of that is that it also helps in the maturation of the skin. So, the insensible water loss is reduced postnatally, and also it helps in the maturation of the renal system. in the fact that most premature babies, if they are not steroided prenatally, they will have say 24 to 48 hours of mandatory oliguria. Whatever you do, they will have mandatory oliguria. This is very true of very low birth weight babies and extremely low birth weight babies. That is 1,500 grams and less than 1,000 grams
Yes.
and less than 27 weeks gestation
Yes,
or
sir.
28 weeks gestation. So this is sort of this effect is countermanded by the administration of steroids. So most neonatologists are aware of this situation. So the normal oliguria which occurs in extremely premature or extremely low birth weight babies and premature babies is sort
Yes.
of offset by the administration of steroids. That we must keep in mind.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Very valuable input. Same thing applies to Niranjan. So
Yeah,
wherever,
can I ask?
yeah, please. That's what I'm saying. Wherever you think you have to give an input, please stop and continue.
Can I add on to this?
Please. That's why I'm saying. Please go ahead.
Yeah, can I add on something to this?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can I add on?
Please.
Yeah. See, in, any baby less than 1,500 grams, as Dr. Ramchandra said, we need to have a fluid of around 80 ml per kg. So usually term babies start around 60 ml per kg. Okay, so there should not be excess weight gain also. Excess fluid administration on the day one, and also there should not be less, because as we know, the skin is immature and there is a lot of insensible water loss, especially from the extracellular fluid space. So we need to reduce the insensible water loss, as sir said rightly, from antenatal steroids and also from the labor room. Whenever there is a preterm delivery, we have to increase the labor room temperature to 28 degrees and also use the plastic sheet to reduce the insensible water loss and transport the baby in a transport incubator. And main thing is maintaining the humidity in the ward. That's one of the most important thing what we need to do. Any baby less than 28 weeks of gestation, we should have a incubator humidity of 80% on day one and reduce by 5% every day till the baby becomes 1 week to 50% of humidity. So thereby reduces the insensible water loss.
Yes, sir.
Niranjan, what are the practical things that you do
Right.
to increase the humidity in the water? No, Niranjan. Apart
Yes,
from
sir. Yes.
putting plastic cover, what are the other things that you ensure to increase the humidity in the
That's what one is the temperature of the incubator, that is 6.5 to 37.5, and humidity about 80% for a preterm baby less than 28 weeks, and reduce by 5% every day till it becomes 50%. And also we use the double walled incubator so that the insensible water loss is reduced. And also we apply the aquaphora or coconut oil to reduce the insensible water loss. And also later on, we make sure that the baby is put on the cap, mittens and all those things when the baby is stabilized.
Okay.
And also, if we don't have a incubator, we use the cling wrap, cling sheets, so that the baby's insensible water loss is reduced by creating an artificial environment, so thereby the humidity is maintained in the incubator. In the open care when we don't have the incubator. So the micro humidity environment is maintained in the warmer, so that insensible water loss is maintained. And also kangaroo mother care is other thing where we reduce the insensible water loss. These are the practical things what we do to reduce the insensible water loss.
Niranjan, pardon me for a dumb question. I'm going to ask a simple dumb question, because generally when there is more humidity, we sweat more. In these babies, we tend to keep the humidity more to reduce the thing. Is it because they have this non-shivering thermogenesis sort of thing, or anything else explanation?
Yes, exactly, and also the skin is very thin. That is the main reason we increase the humidity to reduce the insensible water loss.
And they don't sweat as much.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. Go ahead, Vidya.
Yes, sir. So the choice of fluid will be mostly 10% dextrose in a newborn. On day one, it is given at the rate of 60 to 80 ml per kg per day with limited hydration. And day 2 to day 7, the rate is modified by total body water monitoring. The rate is usually between 80 to 120 ml per kg per day. And the target is to maintain serum glucose more than 60 milligram per deciliter. The electrolytes supplement is usually not required in the first 2 days of life. Sodium may be supplemented thereafter at 2 to 4 millimole per kg per day. Potassium supplementation is usually not required unless the child has been on IV fluids for a long duration and it is given at 1 to 3 millimole per kg per day. Calcium supplemented if there is some hypocalcemia in 1 millimole per kg per day. Coming to electrolyte imbalance, hypernatremia. This occurs to sodium is the major determinant of serum osmolality in the ECF, and the urine sodium excretion it depends on GFR and which is low in neonates. So normal sodium level is between 135 to 140, and when it is high, it is hypernatremia. It may present with decreased extracellular fluid or increased. In a situation where the extracellular fluid is decreased with a sodium of more than 150 milliequivalents per liter, the causes are usually increased renal free water losses, increased insensible water losses, that is dehydration, in via skin, and this is seen in low birth weight babies. Clinical features, there's weight loss, low BP, tachycardia, oliguria or anuria, increased urine specific gravity. Treatment is by replacing free water, maintaining a sodium balance, and the goal is to reduce sodium by less than 0.5 milliequivalent per liter per kg per hour. The target time is about 24 to 48 hours for total correction, and initial fluid is 5% dextrose with half normal saline. Rapid correction may lead to seizures. And in a situation where there's increased ECF with hypernatremia, which may be due to excessive administration of normal saline or post resuscitation efforts, the child will be edematous with weight gain, and we need to look for cardiac compromise in such cases. There's decreased urine output. So identifying cardiac status is most important, and we have to identify excess fluid infusion and establish limits and restrict sodium intake. Hyponatremia also is seen in two clinical scenarios with decreased ECF or increased ECF. With a decreased extracellular fluid compartment, the causes are due to excessive diuretics, glycosuria, osmotic diuresis in case of hyperglycemia, vomiting, diarrhea, or third space loss as seen in NEC. Clinical features, there's weight loss, again, low BP, tachycardia, oliguria or anuria, and increased specific urine gravity, and increased blood urea nitrogen, and concomitant metabolic acidosis may be seen in such cases because of hypoperfusion. An increased ECF, it is used to excessive fluid administration or increased third space loss sometimes in sepsis, shock, distributed shock, or septicemia. Cardiac failure, other pharmacological neuromuscular paralysis, oliguric renal failure as seen in acute tubular necrosis, which may be seen in cases of perinatal asphyxia and in syndrome of appropriate ADH secretion. In these children, there's weight gain, edema, increase in urine output, and decrease in urine osmolality specific gravity. Whereas in SIADH, there is decreased urine output with increased urine specific gravity. So, also isotonic losses can cause hyponatremia. This is seen really in CSF drainage procedures, chylothorax, or excessive nasogastric drainage in ascites. Treatment in hyponatremia with volume depletion, we need to replace the sodium. And in hyponatremia with volume excess, restrict free water. And if sodium is less than 120, 3% NS bolus is titrated based on the sodium levels. Into potassium disturbances, hypokalemia, the most common causes use of excessive diuretics, vomiting, diarrhea, and polyuric renal failure. Clinical features include muscle current conduction abnormalities and cardiac arrhythmias, paralytic ileus, urinary retention, and respiratory muscle paralysis. The treatment is usually with oral supplementation. In severe cases, IV correction may be required, and the rate of IV administration of KCL should not exceed 0.5 to 1 milliequivalent per kg per hour. Hypokalemia is most commonly iatrogenic or may be seen due to renal problems. Clinical features are cardiac arrhythmias and including asystole. Treatment, all exogenous potassium has to be removed. Rehydration is the main cornerstone of treatment. Stabilization of conducting tissues is done with calcium gluconate given at 1 to 2 ml per kg or 30 minutes or 1 hour. Dilution of intracellular shift of potassium is achieved by giving insulin and glucose infusion, and beta 2 adrenergic stimulation, salbutamol nebulizations are given. And to enhance secretion, potassium binders may be used, and an exchange transfusion may be necessary. Calcium is an important ion required for enzyme activity, muscle contraction and relaxation, blood coagulation cascade, bone metabolism, and nerve conduction, as we all know. And the normal levels in your neonate is between 1.2 to 2 millimoles per liter in a neonate. It is present as three fractions. It is either protein bound, that is 30 to 50%, or complex with citrate, lactate, bicarbonate, or inorganic ions. And a metabolically active component is the ionized calcium, which the concentration fluctuates with albumin levels. Hypocalcemia, physiologic hypocalcemia of neonates is seen and is asymptomatic. Other rare causes are hypoparathyroidism, DJOT syndrome, parathyroid hormone insensitivity in infants of diabetic mothers. Hypomagnesemia is an important cause which has to be corrected before calcium levels improve. And clinical manifestations include tremors, seizures, prolonged QT interval. Hypercalcemia is much less common. It is usually seen in inborn errors of metabolism, like in familial hypercalcemic hypocalciuria, primary hyperparathyroidism, or iatrogenic causes where vitamin A overdose is given or deficient nitrogen phosphate intake. Coming to acid-base balance.
Can I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, sir. Please, I was about to say.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, just one practical problem we normally face. This is regarding hypernatremia. So I will give away the clue beforehand. Normally, some normal term newborns will have reddish discoloration of the urine area of the diaper.
Okay.
So, do you know why that is? Anybody can answer that, or I will just answer it.
Give the clue, sir.
It is basically because of the urate crystals that are present in the urine, and these
Yes,
give that reddish or orangish tint to the urine. And if it is persistently occurring, and if you find that the weight loss is more than 10%, normally term newborns should have a weight loss of about 5% in the first 5 days of life, and then they will rapidly regain. Breastfed babies, where the mother is not able to feed the baby properly, and they have this hypernatremia, which sometimes goes up to dangerous levels of 170 milliequivalents per liter. So this is something which you should keep in mind. And usually these babies will be very irritable. And the important clue is more than 10% weight loss from the birth weight. So this has to be kept in mind. This hypernatremia is very dangerous. Normally, it is innocuous, insidious, and we must keep that in mind. So these babies will usually be coming to the OPD from home, so they will not be monitored properly in the hospital or NICU settings. These are term newborns, so this must be kept in mind.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
And before
Sir,
we
can
go
I add
further,
on?
yes,
Has anybody
Niranjan,
encountered that problem in their
Yes.
practical
Sir, can I add on to this?
please,
clinical practice?
Yes, Niranjan,
Sir,
please.
Sir, during the month of March to the June, July, we have around 40 to 50 cases in every year. We come across the hypernatremia ranging from, as Sir said, 150 to 180, 190. So any babies who has hypernatremia, unfortunately, the mother milk letdown will be less. But those mothers, breast milk sodium will be very, very high. And that keeps on continuing. That becomes a vicious cycle. So these are the babies who end up with the hypernatremic dehydration. As Sir said, more than 10% of the weight loss in a term baby. So we need to correct the fluid and the electrolytes depend on the sodium level. If the baby has got a sodium level more than 170, we need to plan to correct the sodium over 3 days. We don't want the sodium to drop suddenly within a day. So in a day, maximum of 12 milliequivalents. As she rightly said, Vidya mentioned, 0.5 milliequivalent per kg per hour should be the sodium should be dropped. So the fluid of this thing choice is we need to calculate the dehydration. So the weight of the baby should be measured. For example, if the baby's weight is 3 kgs at birth and admission weight is 2.4, then the baby weight loss is around 600 grams. Approximately, it comes around 19 to 20% of dehydration. So we take out the physiological weight loss about 10%. So then the total deficit will be around 15%. So if the baby's total dehydration is 25%, so the 15% will be dehydration, we can take it as. So the fluid maintenance, what that baby required, for example, if the baby is on day 9, so 150 ml is the daily requirement for that baby, plus the deficit of 150 ml per kg. So 15% dehydration means it comes up to 150 ml. But that we cannot correct it in a day. So that 150 ml should be divided into 2 days. So 75 ml per kg. So 150 is the maintenance plus 75 ml is the deficit. Okay, that has to be for that 150 plus 75, it comes up to 225 ml. 225 ml per kg has to be given for a baby. For example, if this baby is 3 kgs and admission weight is 2.4 and the average weight we take it as 2.75. So this comes up to 600 ml per kg. So that amount of fluid has to be given over 24 hours. And next is the choice of fluid. What choice we need to make? So usually in hypernatremia, the sodium will be very high and we don't want it to drop suddenly. So we need to have a isotonic saline, that is normal saline, 0.9% normal saline. So that sodium content of the normal saline is 154 milliequivalent. If the baby sodium is 170 and the fluid which we administer is normal saline, which is 154, so the difference is almost 16. So it's 16. So we don't want the 16 to be happen. So then we need to increase the sodium what we give by another 6. So we need to add 3% normal saline. So each ml of 3% normal saline contains about 0.5 milliequivalent. So for another 6 milliequivalents, we need to add 12 ml of 3% normal saline. Then we need to monitor the sodium every 6th hourly. So we don't want the sodium to drop fast because that causes some arachnoid hemorrhage and also demyelination.
Yes, sir.
Excellent, Niranjan. A very good point. But one curiosity, since you said about the summer months where mothers have a tendency to give more sodium in the breast milk, I mean, what is the basis for it and how to identify? Does it happen universally or only in select patients?
Universally, it happens. Those babies who end up with hypernatremic dehydration, they have analyzed the breast milk sodium in the mothers.
Okay.
So they had a very high sodium in the breast milk. Once there is a sodium high in the breast milk, their milk layout will be very low.
Okay.
These mothers need to be supplemented with little amount of artificial milk, the formula milk for few days till the sodium levels in the mother comes down.
Okay.
Sir, meeting might end anytime. So if it ends, we'll have to rejoin, sir.
Especially for Niranjan.
Pardon, sir?
No, in case the meeting abruptly ends, just restart, rejoin.
Okay.
50-minute limit. If you exceed 50 minutes, you stop. If it stops, rejoin again.
Okay, sir.
Thanks. Okay, Vidya.
Yes, sir. Question of acid-base balance in a child. Normal extracellular pH ranges between 7.35 and 7.45. And the pH is calculated from the equation we all know, Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, where pK is the dissociation constant of a weak acid, logarithm of a dissociated acid, and of the concentration of the acid. So normal metabolic process in a child give rise to several weak acids like carbonic acid, lactic acid, keto acids, phosphoric acid, sulfuric acid, and these are usually either excreted or controlled by buffer systems. So buffer systems that are present are either intracellular buffer system or extracellular. Intracellular includes conjugate base pairs in equilibrium, and the most important of these is the carbonic anhydrase system, where this is the equilibrium that exists, and depending on the intravascular pH, the equilibrium either shifts to left or center for fluctuation in pH changes, and this allows for control of acid-base balance. And also increased intracellular protein mass may increase the intracellular buffering. Respiratory compensation becomes active as soon as the respiration is established in the neonate. However, it relies on lung maturity and pulmonary function, so it is impaired in cases of lung disease and premature children. Renal compensation is most important mechanism in a neonate for acid-base balance. It takes 2 to 3 days for maturity to develop, and proximal tubule. So acidosis occurs when there is pH is less than 7.35. This may be due to respiratory, where PaCO2 is more than 45, and the broad cause is hypoventilation due to any condition, and we treat the underlying cause. And metabolic is when bicarbonate is less than 21 millimole per liter. Alkalosis is when the pH is more than 7.5, and respiratory alkalosis is due to PaCO2 less than 35. The broad cause is usually on mechanical ventilation. Treatment is by weaning, reduces pressure, tidal volume, or respiratory. And metabolic acidosis is when bicarbonate. So the respiratory components of the acid-base imbalance will be dealt later during respiratory physiology class. I should be discussing with metabolic acid-base imbalance. Metabolic acidosis is due to rise in free proton ions in the and loss of bicarbonate. And respiratory compensation occurs in primary metabolic acidosis by hyperventilation in a spontaneously breathing baby. However, it cannot hyperventilate to an extent where alkalosis develops, as it can never overcompensate. And causes of metabolic acidosis, lactic acidosis is the most important cause. It is due to tissue hypoxia, which is seen in sepsis or hypotension. So it's as hypertension is actually hypotension, and this is what we see in cases with NEC, where necrotizing enterocolitis, where tissue hypoxia is reflected as lactic acidosis, which may be seen as metabolic acidosis. In those cases, also respiratory acidosis may be seen because of distended abdomen. The other causes are inability to excrete or buffer organic ions, protein loading or renal immaturity, excessive loss of bicarbonate in urine. There is normal anion gap. The common inborn errors of metabolism is a rare cause, and hyperchloremia. Hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis occurs when chloride is more than 130, and this situation is seen when in a child on TPN. Treatment is usually treatment of the underlying cause of usually sepsis or hypotension. Volume expansion. There are also suggestions for
Vidya,
Yes, sir.
your voice is fluctuating. Please, if you're not using a microphone, use a microphone and maybe reduce. It will help you.
Yes, sir. Treatment. So there are also some studies which suggest slow infusion of buffer, such as bicarbonate, or use of THAM, that is tris hydroxymethylamine methane, as a therapeutic adjunct. And bicarbonate levels are calculated based on base excess into weight. However, this is use of bicarbonate is controversial and it is used only in severe cases. Metabolic alkalosis, the causes are usually hypochloremia or use of excessive diuretic therapy, upper GI obstruction like in pyloric stenosis, where it is concomitant with hypochloremia, and persistent vomiting, or increased nasogastric drainage, excessive administration of bicarbonate. This again, the treatment is based on treating the underlying cause. More to the next subsection, metabolism in a neonate. Neonate, at birth, there is a transition.
Niranjan, anything to add here? If you have to add, please add it now before we go to the next section. Niranjan?
Yes, sir.
If there is anything to add, please add.
Nothing much to be added. She has done this thing. She is very clear about what she has told.
Oh, thanks.
So the other part of perinatal changes in body composition, as we already saw, there's a gradual decrease in extracellular fluid compartment. This is associated with an increase in fat content from preterm to a term child. So it is inversely proportional to total body water. And neonates have rapid growth, higher energy expenditure, and lower calorie reserves. And this make them susceptible to starvation. They cannot tolerate prolonged starvation. So energy requirement in a neonate, they have higher metabolic rate, hence higher energy requirement per kg body weight. So when they are on oral feeds, as you can see here, a preterm neonate requires about 130 to 150 kilocalorie per kg per day, and a term neonate will require 100 to 120. So this is divided as shown in the bar graph on the right as used for growth, tissue growth and storage. It is expended as metabolic in metabolism or losses in excreta. In total parental nutrition, the requirements are lower, like 110 to 120 in a preterm child, or in a term child, 90 to 100, as there is no loss in excreta, and also there is no loss in thermoregulation, as the child will usually be in an incubator and in an ICU setting. So energy reserve may be calculated in infants based on that formula there, resting energy expenditure per day divided by non-protein energy reserve. This gives the energy reserve estimate in days. In about 24 to 25 weeks gestation fetus, the energy reserve is only about 2 days based on the glycogen storage and fat. As the fat and glycogen stores increase, as shown in the graph, by term, the child will have 20 days of energy reserve. So, in very low birth weight and extremely low birth weight neonates, there is an urgent need for adequate caloric intake, and early parenteral nutrition is known to be beneficial in such cases. The child in the perinatal period, transition in nutrition occurs from
Sir,
placental
can I
glucose
add a
supply.
little bit on this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
At every level,
So-
Niraj, you're free to add, please.
Yeah. So for every raise in 1 gram of protein in a preterm baby will reduce the mental developmental index by 8.2%, and every 10 calories increase in the nutrition will decrease the increase the mental developmental index by 4.2%. So the proteins and the calories are very, very important. As she rightly mentioned, when enteral feeds is about 130 to 150. So when TPN comes, it is about 110 to 120. Why the difference? The difference is basically because in enteral feeds, the what all the proteins and the fat we take, it won't be completely absorbed. Around 80 to 85% is absorbed. The rest is excreted in the this thing. So this is the one thing which I wanted to add. So main thing is you need to give proteins and calories for the babies, especially for preterm babies, even in a term baby. And this has to be given to those babies where we don't unable to achieve the calories about feeds by 70 ml per kg per day, or in a preterm baby, or by fifth day in a term baby when we are unable to achieve around 70 ml per kg per day. These are the babies where we need to start TPN.
Thank you very much, Niranjan. Vidya, continue.
Yes, sir. So when there is a transition from placental glucose supply to milk, which is high in fat and low in carbohydration. So the successful adaptation of a neonate to the extrauterine life requires it to regulate changes in glucose and fat metabolism and use protein reserves which are stored until adequate nutritional supply of protein or amino acids is available. So glucose metabolism occurs. So the energy supply in a fetus is majority by carbohydrates, that is 70%. Whereas in a newborn, the majority is by fat, 50%, and only 40% is by carbohydrates. So the glucose homeostasis is maintained by insulin glucagon levels, and two main processes, mechanisms, that is glycogenolysis, breakdown of glycogen to yield glucose, which contributes to 40% of glucose turnover, and gluconeogenesis, which uses substrates like glycerol, alanine, and amino acids lactate to produce glucose. So the glucose turnover in a preterm is high, about 5 to 6 mg per kg per minute. In a term neonate, about 3 to 5, whereas in an adult, it is only about 2 to 3. So insulin and post-cord clamping, there is a surge in glucagon at birth. So postnatally, there is a rapid increase in gluconeogenetic capacity for a child to maintain glucose levels. The islet cells have slow response to blood glucose levels, especially in preterms in the first 2 weeks of life, and there is less end organ sensitivity to insulin. So the role of insulin, there is less insulin sensitivity and lesser response to hyperglycemia in a neonate. Glycogenolysis, the hepatic and renal glycogen stores are mobilized soon after birth to maintain glucose levels, and these stores are exhausted usually within 24 hours and sooner in a preterm. Gluconeogenesis occurs about 4 to 6 hours post-birth. In an increased G6PD activity is seen after birth, which reflects the gluconeogenesis. And whereas in preterm infants, parenteral supplementation of glycerol and lipids, which lipid formulations which include glycerol and fatty acids, are known to enhance the rate of gluconeogenesis. Because in preterms they have less enzyme activity, they are not able to. They don't have phosphoenol pyruvate carboxy kinase, and hence they have limitation to have gluconeogenesis from amino acids and lactic acids. So this is known to help. And ATP and acetyl-CoA coenzyme is which is required for gluconeogenesis is provided by the fatty acid oxidation. Neonatal hypoglycemia. The blood glucose falls after birth spontaneously or post-feeding, post-feeding it normalizes. And definition of hypoglycemia at term neonate may be may be defined as less than 45 milligram with abnormal clinical signs, or less than 36 in a neonate with risk factors for compromised adaptation metabolically, and in a preterm less than 47. And despite the variation in definition, the main recommendation is to maintain blood glucose more than 45 milligram per deciliter in all parenterally fed infants. The clinical features of hypoglycemia may present as jitteriness, tremors, apnea, cyanosis, limpness, apathy, or lethargy, abnormal cry, and in severe cases they may have cardiac arrest, seizures, hypothermia, tachypnea, and there are many causes of hypoglycemia in a neonate. They may be associated with changes in a maternal metabolism, in maternal diabetes, and administration of oral hypoglycemic drugs, or neonatal problems of adaptation, perinatal hypoxia, asphyxia, infection, sepsis, hypothermia. They are all known to cause hypoglycemia, IUGR, and other endocrine and metabolic causes, hyperinsulinism, or inborn errors of metabolism. Neonatal hyperglycemia is very rare. It is seen, diabetes mellitus is very rare in a neonate, 1 in 4 lakh. And transient neonatal diabetes mellitus may be seen and resolves in 3 to 6 months of age, and 50% may become permanent DM. Other causes increase glucose infusion rates, that is iatrogenic, or end organ insulin resistance. Corticosteroid administration can cause hyperglycemia and response to pain or surgery. Consequences, there may be osmotic diuresis, glycosuria, increased morbidity and mortalities are seen in studies with neonates with NEC. Treatment is usually, the treatment is controversial use of insulin to maintain euglycemia. Some studies have noted short-term improvement in outcomes, whereas long-term effects are not known. Lipid and fat metabolism.
Sir, can I add on to this?
Yes.
So hypoglycemia is divided into two. One is, as you rightly said, less than 45, and we take it one more, this thing value is less than 25. So less than 45, there are two different categories. One is symptomatic and asymptomatic. If they are symptomatic, then we need to treat by IV glucose. Okay, if they're asymptomatic, the child can be fed, you can give the feeds and check the GRBS after 1 hour. And if it is more than 45, we can continue with the feeds. Suppose if the baby's glucose is less than 45, even after feeding the baby after 1 hour, we have to give an IV correction about 2 ml per kg of 10%, that is 200 milligram of glucose, and followed by the maintenance.
Yes, sir.
Any baby's glucose less than 25 milligram per deciliter can be, should be considered as a symptomatic hypoglycemia and should be treated with the IV glucose.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay.
Lipid and fat metabolism. Fat is the main source of energy in neonates, where 40 to 50% of the calories are derived from it, and it's the main store of energy in neonates. It is used within 3 months of life, and most important are phospholipids and fat-derived lipids for cell membrane synthesis. Fatty acid oxidation and ketogenesis occurs by sequential removal of 2 carbon units from the acyl chain, and it is a major source of ATP for heart and skeletal muscles. The substrates used are non-esterified fatty acids bound to albumin and intracellular glycerol. So the hepatic beta oxidation provides ketone bodies, acetoacetate and beta hydroxybutyrate, which form the alternative fuel for brain when there is not sufficient glucose. ATP and acetyl-CoA are produced as byproduct of this beta oxidation, which is necessary for gluconeogenesis. In the immediate postnatal period, there is an increase in glucagon and catecholamines, and this increases lipolysis, and circulating fatty acids and glycerol are increased. Protein and amino acid metabolism. Infants maintain a positive nitrogen balance for growth and development. And from either oral or IV diet, an infant has the capacity to retain 80% of protein as metabolizable protein. So when an increase in protein intake occurs, increase in protein synthesis occurs with reduce in protein breakdown endogenously. An increase in carbohydrates and fat also increase protein retention, and this is known as the protein sparing effect. Hence, addition of fats to parenteral nutrition decreases protein oxidation for energy expenditure and increases protein retention in the babies. Protein requirements in a newborn are 2.5 to 3 gram per kg per day. There is higher requirement in severe malnutrition, increased losses such as children with jejunostomy, ileostomy. Milk contains proteins, free amino acids, and anti-infective property in the form of IgA, IgM, IgG, and lactoferrin. In TPN, nitrogen source is from crystalline amino acids. It usually has the 8 essential amino acids along with histidine, which becomes essential in neonates. Glutamine is a non-essential amino acid with many biologic functions. It is the preferential fuel for the immune system and the GIT. So it is conditionally essential during sepsis, and addition to TPN is known to preserve mucosal structure, prevent bacterial translocation, and it decreases infection rates. So it is usually supplemented with TPN. Metabolic response to stress in neonates. Stress is any factor that causes disequilibrium. An operative trauma is a controlled injury which elicits metabolic, inflammatory, endocrine, and immune system responses. As you see on the right side, the classical ebb and flow phase of hypo and hypermetabolism, which is seen in adults post-surgery, sepsis, or stress. But this does not happen as dramatically in neonates. The immediate post-op resting energy expenditure and oxygen consumption, it peaks at 4 hours and usually returns to baseline at 12 to 24 hours. And it is more significant post-major surgery or severe sepsis. And in infants more than day 2, there is more increase in resting energy expenditure post-surgery because less than 48 hours of life, there is increased endogenous opioids in the neonate, which blunts endocrine and metabolic responses. Inflammatory responses are similar to as in adults, where there's recruitment of monocytes and polymorphonuclear leukocytes and cytokine production, chemoattraction, and WBC infiltration. So this happens first few hours post-op. Interleukin 6 peaks at 12 hours post-op, and it's proportional to degree of trauma and may be used as a marker of stress response. The tumor necrosis factor increases glucose transport, and interleukin 1 and 6 increase hepatic gluconeogenesis and muscle proteolysis. The endocrine response also lasts between 24 to 48 hours. It is seen with increase in insulin levels, cortisol, catecholamines, increased lactate levels, and lactate levels is related to the magnitude of operative stress. The effect of stress on glucose metabolism, there's a hyperglycemic response, which is short-lived for about 12 hours. It depends on the degree of stress, the glucose levels, and it is multifactorial. Already described endocrine responses will be contributory. So glucose intake is a principal determinant of carbohydrate and fat use post-surgery. The maximal oxidative capacity for glucose in infants undergoing surgery is 18 gram per kg per day. If glucose is given more than this, in excess of this, there will be the net fat oxidation ceases, so fat synthesis will increase. The thermogenic effect of glucose, that is just the waste byproduct, that will increase, and effective glucose metabolism decreases, and plasma triglyceride levels increases. And these are all beneficial, not beneficial. Effect on fat metabolism, there's an increase in lipolysis, increase in free fatty acid and ketone bodies. The infants rapidly adapt to IV fat within 2 hours when given exogenously. More than 80% can be used for fatty oxidation. And carbon dioxide production decreases during fat infusion as the carbohydrate conversion to fat will stop. So commonly used fat emulsions in parenteral nutrition are based on long-chain triglycerides. L-carnitine and medium-chain triglycerides are also used to increase the rate of fatty oxidation. Effect on protein metabolism, negative nitrogen balance due to muscle and protein catabolism. This is short-lived, and this can be overcome by giving additional dietary nitrogen or calories. And post-op infants, unlike adults, do not show a big change in whole body flux or protein synthesis or amino acid oxidation or protein degradation. And this is usually explained by diversion of energy for growth to tissue repair. So whatever energy or protein was used for growth will be diverted to tissue repair, and hence there is not much change. Coming to the next subtopic, thermoregulation. Neonates are homeotherms. They require a neutral thermal environment. This is defined as external temperature range within which metabolic rate and oxygen consumption are at a minimum while infant maintains normal body temperature. The normal skin temperature in a neonate is between 30 to 36 to 36.5. Normal core temperature is 36.5 to 37.5. And axillary temperature is usually 0.5 to 1 degree centigrade lower than this. So a balance between heat production and loss leads to normal body temperature. So the neutral thermal environment based on gestational age, the first week of age, is shown in this figure. The heat loss occurs by four main mechanisms, which majority is by evaporation from the skin, and more than 50% post delivery when the amniotic fluid evaporates, and it is inversely proportional to skin maturity, as there is transdermal water loss. Conduction is direct heat loss to a cold object which is in contact. Convection is heat loss to surrounding air by air currents and is proportional to air temperature, air movement velocity. Radiation is heat loss to a colder object which is not in contact with the baby. 40% or more can occur without clothing, blanket, or in low room air movement. Response to cold in a neonate is different compared to adults. A preterm infant is more predisposed due to its body surface area, less subcutaneous fat, reduced glycogen and brown fat, and its hypotonic posture, which increases its body surface area. So it cannot maintain the flexed posture. So temperature sensors, when they sense low temperature, there's an increased sympathetic output from the central nervous system, which causes norepinephrine release. This stimulates the beta adrenergic receptors in brown fat. The most common sites are supraclavicular cervical region, perirenal, adrenal, and paravertebral region. So the brown fat is brown because of high mitochondria, and this leads to non-shivering thermogenesis, which is unique to neonates. Oxidation of fatty acids occurs from brown fat, where there is increased oxygen consumption, metabolic rate, and heat production. Thermoregulation can occur up to 8% of thermal energy expenditure in a thermal neutral zone. So the resting energy expenditure can double when full non-shivering thermogenesis takes place. So brown adipose tissue contains a protein called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1, which dissipates the proton gradient formed across the mitochondrial inner membrane during substrate oxidation. So the proton is usually pumped out of the intermembranous space during oxidative phosphorylation, proportional to the rate of oxygen consumption. And then the proton returns to the matrix by two routes, either by the phosphorylation pathway, which generates ATP, or another is known by the leak pathway, which is non-productive and releases energy as heat. So this is the source of significant resting heat production. Hypothermia in a neonate. Non-shivering thermogenesis can cause insufficient, when there's hypothermia and excessive non-shivering thermogenesis, the sequelae are insufficient oxygen supply, hypoxemia, hypoglycemia, metabolic acidosis, decreased growth, apnea, and also pulmonary hypertension. Also, hypothermia has increased post-op complications because of acidosis, impaired immune function, delayed wound healing, and after compensatory mechanisms are overwhelmed, there may be clotting disorders, shock, intraventricular hemorrhage, bradycardia, and increased neonatal mortality. The treatment is rapid versus slow rewarming. When there's rapid rewarming, there may be apnea, hypotension, rapid electrolyte shifts, and rewarming rate should be 1 degree Celsius per hour, and 0.5 degree per hour if the infant is less than 1.2 kg or gestation age is less than 28 weeks, or the temperature is core temperature is less than 32 Celsius. And this has to be done under monitoring. The equipment used are closed incubators, so usually used in infants less than 1.8 kg. It's convectively heated with double layer walls to prevent radiant heat loss, and if humidified, evaporation loss also is compensated, but it limits close observation and procedures. It is maintained by a servo-controlled skin probe or air temperature control device or air temperature probe. Radiant warmer is used for unstable infants during medical procedures. It heats by radiation and does not prevent convective or evaporative losses. The temperature is maintained by servo mode or manual mode. But this has high insensible water losses. It can be reduced by, as I said earlier, by using semi-permeable dressing or like coconut oil application. Adding heating matrices gives additional thermal stability. Hybrid incubator uses intermittently both vertical adjustable radiant heater or a drop-down incubator wall. So it has better fluid balance and growth velocity is seen in such incubators. Kangaroo mother care is skin-to-skin contact with the mother or father, and heat is by conduction high enough to compensate convective and evaporative losses. It also promotes parental bonding, better feeding, better sleep patterns, and procedural pain relief is known. So, thermoregulation and anesthesia. All anesthetic drugs are known to increase the interthreshold. That is, it increases the upper threshold and lower threshold for thermal homeostasis. So, non-thermic and non-shivering thermogenesis inhibited in a setting of general anesthesia. So redistribution hypothermia occurs because of transfer of heat from core to periphery caused by vasodilation, which is induced by anesthetic agents, and it causes the initial drop of 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the first hour under anesthesia. So active warming has to be done, use of heated gases, heated forced air, heated lamps, pads, heated IV fluids, all can be used in slowing or eliminating heat loss during intraoperative period. So the most effective means of limiting heat loss is increasing the ambient temperature of the operating room and use of simple insulators such as plastic sheet or cloth coverings. So there's a study which says perioperative thermal instability is higher in procedures done in OR compared to NICU. However, overall rate was higher and hence strict adherence to all the principles of maintaining normothermia has to be adhered because they had higher respiratory adverse events in the perioperative period in the hypothermic group. Hypothermia is rare where temperature is more than 37.5. There are many causes which may be environmental infection, dehydration, maternal fever in labor, drug withdrawal, and unusual causes like hypothyroid syndrome, drug effect, or hypothalamic causes like Riley-Day syndrome. The consequences are increased metabolic rate, oxygen consumption, tachycardia, tachypnea, irritability, apnea, and it can cause dehydration, acidosis, brain damage, and death. So the treatment initial step is defining the cause, reduce the ambient heat, remove clothing, tepid water sponging, paracetamol is given, and water-filled cooling blankets may be used. Thank you.
Vidya, I have to compliment you. Tough topic, dry topic, but you made it interesting, and I think you covered everything. I think even the neonatologist will agree with this.
Thank you.
Niranjan, and then Ramchandra sir, and any other PGs,
Thank you,
any
sir.
questions, comments?
Sir, we have a question in the chat. Gopal sir is asking to give the idea for replacement fluids.
Vidya?
Replacement fluids usually based on we have to look at the electrolyte imbalance and supplement the electrolytes. If not, 10% dextrose is the preferred fluid in a neonate, or 5% dextrose with half normal saline. The finer points, I'm not sure.
Can I know what replacement fluid? Can I know what replacement fluid you are asking for?
Hello?
No?
Yeah. I thought when he is asking for replacement fluid, it means there's a additional loss of fluid apart from the conventional losses,
Yeah.
which
So
he is trying to replace.
usually we replace by ringer lactate, and the lower urinary losses and the lower ostomies loss replaced by half normal saline.
Okay, it's clear. So it depends on the quantity of loss, estimated quantity of loss, and the type of the fluid which is lost. GA fluid is different, bile aspirates are different, or for the matter, if it is a gastric outlet obstruction, the replacement is different. Right, Niranjan?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can I ask this question, Ramesh?
And
Yes,
coming
Gopal, please.
to the fluid, suppose somebody has got a question about, suppose somebody has got a question with fluid to start on day 1 and day 2.
Yeah.
Day 1 and day 2 should be electrolyte free fluids, and it should be with maintain the GIR of our photos to add on calcium.
Okay.
So calcium requirement is around 30 milligram initially first 2 days, then increase up to around 75 to 80 milligram per kg per day.
Okay. Good. Gopal, you're trying to ask something. Please directly ask.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this is like basically we were taught like the first 2 days you go for dextrose 10%, and then from day 3 onwards we were giving something like a 10% isolate P or something, and later on isolate P. But thing is nowadays most of the pediatricians seem to have switched to half DNS.
Correct. Because isolate P is completely sort of given up, Gopal. Isolate P is a phenomenon which is only in India. And
Yeah.
over the last several years, we have stopped using isolate P. It's a simple back of the formula thumb, but it
When you're
doesn't
giving
give.
half DNS, or when do you start adding potassium to that?
Okay. Niranjan will take the answer question. Niranjan?
Yeah, so potassium should be, see, as rightly said, sodium should be added on day 2 onwards once the urine output is established, once the renal system matures. So that's what we wait for. That indirect evidence is the urine output. So for a term baby, we use around 2 to 3 milligrams per kg per day as a maintenance. And for a preterm baby less than 28 weeks, we go up to 6 milligram, 4 to 6 milliequivalents per kg per day. And potassium usually we start on day 3, day 4 of the baby, or any baby when we don't anticipate that we are unable to achieve 70 ml per kg per day of feeds, then we're going to start potassium in the fluids. And of course, we need to monitor the potassium by the blood sampling.
Okay. In addition, Niranjan, can you clarify what is our NSA protocol of fluids? On day 1, you give 10% dextrose, and day 3 onwards, give half DNS or 1/3 DNS or 1/5
Yeah.
DNS.
One third DNS, sodium
Okay.
accordingly to the weight, 2 to 3 milligram per kg. Depend on that, we use around half DNS or 1/3 DNS.
Okay.
Okay, and we add potassium 1 to 2 milliequivalents per kg per day.
Okay. From day 3 onwards.
Day 3 onwards.
Isolate P completely disbanded. I'm keen to know that.
Gopal, you're not clear. Can you
Pardon me?
please repeat the question?
Why has isolate P been completely so disbanded? Like, what is the reason for that? Is there
Because
any-
it's unphysiological. It is simply a universal fitting all together. So it doesn't actually, because previously, and isolate P was available only in India to the best of my knowledge. And it's a sort of shortcut. So we were using it left, right, and center because we are lazy to calculate it. But later on, that they found is unphysiological. So every child's requirements are different. So you can't put them all in one basket. So that's why I thought they'll change. I mean, that's the best of my knowledge. Of course, Niranjan and Ramchandra sir can add something here.
Yeah, the sodium content is very less in that. Even the potassium doesn't meet the need of the baby. So that's the reason it was not serving. So for that also we need to, add on sodium to bring up the sodium level to the need, and also the potassium. So it was not serving the purpose. That is the main reason that the isolate P was taken out.
Like isolate P is something equal to 1/5 DNS. That means the sodium input is always less.
Yes, very
Ramchandra
less.
sir, anything you wanted to ask? Sir, comments?
No, I think Dr. Niranjan has clarified all the doubts. Just that we have to stress on the fact that metabolic acidosis is one of the major problems we face in surgical newborns and any other newborn.
Yes,
So
sir.
it is a major problem we face in newborns, metabolic acidosis.
Yes, sir.
So we need to remember that. That is the most important thing.
Okay.
And that is the reason for that is that newborns essentially have problems with handling acid.
Okay.
So that is because their kidneys cannot reabsorb this thing, bicarbonate, nor they can excrete hydrogen ion. See, these are the two things which make acidosis a very, very dangerous thing. In addition to that, they are growing. So when they are growing, they are adding calcium to their skeleton. So it is found that 1 gram of calcium gives rise to 20 protons.
Okay.
So that increases the acidotic load for the newborn. And
Okay.
also the feeds which we give, they are generally acid generating feed. So those are the things we have to keep in mind, and make sure that we know completely about metabolic acidosis. That is the bugbear of management of problems in the neonatal surgical as well as sick newborns.
Okay.
I think metabolic acidosis is a very important. as I told you yesterday in my message
Yes,
in
sir.
the IGISH
Yes,
group, it is the elephant in the room.
Yes, sir.
So we have to recognize it all the time. Always in the back of the mind, we must keep it in mind that metabolic acidosis is there. It is possible. It is dangerous to the baby. And as Vidya mentioned, it gives rise to many consequences. In addition, and also it can set off problems with respiratory issues, and also with the pulmonary hypertension. So all these things we must keep in mind, and we must be aware of the fact that early recognition and treatment and prevention of metabolic acidosis is the most important goal in one of the most important goals in neonatal physiology.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Niranjan, before we close, first we will want to thank you very sincerely because you brought a lot of value to the topic, and we are quite glad with your input and also to know how our NICU functions. So it will be much better for all of us. Thank you very much, Niranjan, for participating. Looking forward to your active participation in the next few classes too.